At 3 in the morning, a girl stumbled toward his porch wearing a torn designer dress, her wrists bloodied from rope burns, terror carved into every line of her face. 2 men in black suits pursued her through the shadows of Cedar Falls, their footsteps echoing like death itself. Marcus Thompson grabbed his hunting rifle and stepped into darkness that would change everything. He didn't hesitate, raised his weapon and shouted into the night, watching the strangers retreat to their sleek sedan. The girl collapsed at his feet, whispering a name that would haunt him forever. She looked up with eyes that held secrets worth killing for, and Marcus realized he'd just stepped into a war he couldn't possibly understand. What he didn't know was that saving her would cost him everything he thought he wanted, and give him everything he never knew he needed. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Marcus sat across from the stranger who had shattered his quiet world. Her name was Lily, she'd whispered between shaky breaths, and the purple bruises circling her wrists told stories she wasn't ready to share. Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, had taken one look at the wounded woman and immediately appointed herself chief caretaker, bringing bandages, her favorite stuffed rabbit, and the kind of innocent kindness that made Marcus's chest ache with memories of Sarah. His wife had possessed that same gentle spirit before cancer claimed her 2 years ago, leaving him to raise their daughter alone in this small Ohio town where everyone knew everyone else's business. The irony wasn't lost on him that the first person to breach their carefully constructed solitude was a woman running from shadows he couldn't see. Lily refused to let him call the police, her green eyes wide with a terror that went deeper than physical wounds. She claimed the men who'd chased her had connections everywhere, that official channels weren't safe, that she'd learned not to trust anyone in uniform or anyone who asked too many questions. Marcus found himself studying her torn designer dress, the expensive watch still clinging to her bruised wrist despite everything she'd endured, the way she spoke with refined diction that belonged in boardrooms rather than his modest kitchen. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege, yet here she was, bleeding on his furniture and flinching every time a car passed on the rural road outside. The contradiction bothered him more than he cared to admit, but something in her desperation felt genuine enough to override his natural skepticism. "They kidnapped me 3 days ago," Lily explained, pulling Emma's pink blanket tighter around her shoulders like armor against memories that obviously still had claws. "I managed to escape last night, found your truck in town and followed you home. I'm sorry for bringing this to your door, but I had nowhere else to go." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned that safety was an illusion and trust a luxury she could no longer afford. Emma crawled onto the couch beside her with the fearless empathy only children possessed, patting Lily's arm and announcing that she could stay as long as she needed because their house had plenty of room. Marcus watched his daughter's immediate acceptance of this stranger and felt something protective stir in his chest, though he couldn't tell if he was protecting Emma from getting too attached or protecting Lily from a world that had obviously failed her spectacularly. Sheriff Jake Morrison arrived within an hour of Marcus's carefully worded phone call, his weathered face serious as he listened to an edited version of the night's events. Jake had been Marcus's friend since high school, through Sarah's illness and death, through the lonely months of learning to be a single father in a town where married couples dominated the social landscape. But even Jake's reassuring presence couldn't shake Marcus's growing certainty that this situation was bigger than small-town law enforcement could handle, that involving official channels might put Lily in more danger rather than less. Something about her fear felt too real, too specific, for him to risk her safety on bureaucratic procedures and official reports. He made a decision that would haunt him for weeks, telling Jake about suspicious activity around his property, but keeping Lily's presence carefully hidden, watching his oldest friend drive away while wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. That evening found Marcus in his woodshop, trying to process the day's surreal events while his hands moved through familiar motions of sanding and shaping. The half-finished music box sat on his workbench like an accusation, a project he'd started for Sarah before her diagnosis, but never found the heart to complete after her death. The delicate maple inlay work reminded him of promises he'd never gotten to keep, of a future that had died along with his wife in a sterile hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Lily appeared in the doorway like a ghost drawn by the soft sounds of craftsmanship, approaching the music box with the reverence people usually reserved for sacred objects. She traced the intricate woodwork with fingertips that knew quality when they felt it, her touch gentle as prayer. "She must have been extraordinary," Lily said softly, and Marcus realized this stranger somehow understood his grief better than neighbors who'd known him his entire life. The following days passed in a strange, suspended reality that felt like living inside someone else's dream. Lily proved herself far more than a helpless victim, demonstrating skills that left Marcus puzzled and quietly impressed. She could identify different wood species by scent alone, knew the proper angles for dovetail joints, and possessed an intuitive understanding of grain patterns that took most woodworkers years to develop. When he asked where she'd learned such things, she'd offer cryptic references to someone who taught me to appreciate beautiful things, before changing the subject with practiced ease. Her knowledge felt too specific to be casual interest, too deep to be mere hobby. But Lily deflected his questions with the skill of someone who'd had plenty of practice keeping secrets. Marcus found himself watching her work, noting the way her hands moved with confidence despite their obvious trembling, wondering what other hidden depths lay beneath her frightened exterior. Emma adored their mysterious houseguest with that instant, unconditional acceptance that made children such reliable judges of character. She followed Lily around like a devoted shadow, soaking up fairy tales told in accents that belonged in European castles, learning to braid friendship bracelets with techniques that seemed far too sophisticated for casual knowledge. Lily helped with homework assignments, created elaborate games that turned chores into adventures, and somehow knew exactly how Emma liked her sandwiches cut and her bedtime stories told. Marcus watched them together during quiet moments, struck by how naturally Lily had slipped into their lives, filling spaces he hadn't even realized were empty. She made Saturday morning pancakes with the same careful attention Sarah had brought to the ritual, hummed lullabies that sent Emma to sleep without tears for the first time in months, and brought a gentle joy to their house that felt like the sun emerging after a long winter. But it was the small, unguarded moments that completely undid Marcus's carefully maintained emotional distance, the way Lily unconsciously hummed while folding laundry, her voice sweet and slightly off-key. The careful attention she paid to Sarah's herb garden, weeding and watering with the devotion of someone who understood that growing things required faith in futures you might not live to see. The patient gentleness she showed when Emma woke from nightmares, sitting beside the child's bed until sleep returned without demanding explanations or offering false reassurances. One evening, as they worked together to restore the music box's delicate mechanism, their hands brushed reaching for the same tool, and the contact sent electricity through Marcus's entire nervous system. He found himself looking into Lily's eyes, seeing something there that made his heart race and his conscience ache with guilt he thought he'd moved beyond. "I haven't felt like this since Sarah died," Marcus admitted one night as they sat on his front porch, Emma safely asleep upstairs, and crickets providing soundtrack to his confession. The words came harder than he'd expected, carrying weight that felt dangerous in the soft darkness between them. "I feel guilty for being attracted to you, but I also feel guilty for making you wait while I figure out how to forgive myself for wanting to be happy again." Lily's hand found his in the darkness, her touch warm and real and terrifying in its implications. her fingers intertwined with his like they belonged there, like this moment had been waiting for them both through years of loneliness and loss. "Sarah sounds like she was an amazing woman," Lily said quietly. "But I don't think she'd want you to stop living, because she couldn't stay." The simple wisdom in her words hit him like a physical blow, because he knew she was right, and knowing made everything more complicated rather than less. 3 weeks into their strange domestic arrangement, Marcus began to notice changes in Lily that should have warned him that their borrowed time was running out. She started checking the windows more frequently, flinching when cars passed too slowly on the rural road, carrying herself with the hyper-vigilance of someone expecting bad news to arrive at any moment. Her nightmares increased in frequency and intensity, leaving her hollow-eyed and jumpy during the day, despite her efforts to hide her exhaustion from Emma. Marcus found her one morning standing at the kitchen window at dawn, fully dressed as if she'd never gone to bed, watching the driveway with the focused attention of a sentry expecting attack. When he asked if she was all right, she turned to him with eyes that held too much knowledge and not enough hope. "They're getting closer," she said simply, as if discussing weather or grocery lists, and Marcus felt cold certainty settle in his stomach like a stone. The music box was nearly complete when their carefully constructed world began to crumble. Marcus had been working late in his shop, adjusting the delicate mechanism that would bring Sarah's last gift to musical life, when he heard Emma's voice from the kitchen carrying the animated excitement she reserved for her favorite people. He emerged from the workshop, expecting to find his daughter chatting with Lily about school or homework, but instead discovered them discussing Emma's dreams of becoming a veterinarian, with Lily offering encouragement that felt too knowledgeable to be casual. "My father always said that caring for living things requires both strength and gentleness," Lily was saying, her voice carrying affection tinged with something that might have been regret. He used to collect music boxes from all over the world, said they reminded him that beautiful things could still exist even when the world felt broken. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because of what Emma had said, but because of the way Lily's entire body had gone rigid with barely contained panic. That night, as Marcus lay awake, staring at ceiling shadows that seemed to mock his growing paranoia, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was solving began clicking into place with sickening clarity. The expensive clothing, the refined mannerisms, the casual references to wealth and privilege that Lily dropped without seeming to notice. Her knowledge of fine craftsmanship, her familiarity with luxury brands, the way she moved through his modest home like someone temporarily slumming rather than someone who belonged in places like Cedar Falls. Most damning of all, her father's collection of music boxes from around the world, a detail so specific it felt like a breadcrumb leading toward truths. Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to discover. He found himself remembering news stories from recent months, fragments of headlines about missing persons and family dramas in circles so far above his own social standing that he'd paid them no attention at the time. Now, lying in darkness with growing dread coiling in his stomach, he wondered if ignorance had been a luxury he could no longer afford. The answer arrived on a Tuesday morning that started with Emma's scream shattering the peaceful silence of another ordinary day. Marcus dropped his coffee mug and ran toward the sound, finding his daughter pressed against the kitchen window with terror written across her small face. She pointed toward the end of their driveway with a shaking finger, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice when he saw the black sedan parked there like a patient predator. The same vehicle from that first night, with the same men in dark suits standing beside it, no longer bothering with pursuit or stealth. They'd found what they were looking for, and now they were simply waiting for their prey to acknowledge the inevitable. Marcus realized with crystal clarity that their borrowed time had finally run out, and whatever came next would change everything for all of them. Lily appeared at his shoulder, moving like sleepwalker, her face drained of all color and her hands shaking as she automatically moved to shield Emma from whatever was coming. "They found me?" she whispered, her voice carrying years of resignation mixed with fresh terror. And Marcus heard in those 3 words the sound of someone who'd been running her entire life. But this time felt different, because this time she wasn't alone. And Marcus Thompson had never backed down from a fight when it mattered. He retrieved his hunting rifle from the gun cabinet with movements made steady by righteous anger, checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, and headed for the front door with grim determination settling over him like familiar armor. If these people wanted Lily, they'd have to go through him first, and he had no intention of making that easy for them. The confrontation that followed was surreal in its civility, like a business meeting conducted at gunpoint. The men introduced themselves as private security specialists, professional and polite, as they explained their purpose with the calm efficiency of people accustomed to getting their way through superior resources rather than violence. They were there to retrieve Miss Harrison, they explained, and return her safely to her family, who'd been frantic with worry since her disappearance over 6 weeks ago. The name hit Marcus like a lightning bolt of recognition. Harrison, as in Harrison Industries, the manufacturing empire that employed half the county and whose logo adorned buildings throughout Ohio. As in William Harrison, the billionaire industrialist whose face graced business magazine covers and whose charitable foundations sponsored everything from hospital wings to scholarship programs. Marcus felt reality shifting beneath his feet as he realized the woman he'd been falling in love with was worth more money than he could comprehend, and that their entire relationship had been built on deceptions he was only beginning to understand. "Lily Harrison?" Marcus said slowly, watching her face for confirmation of suspicions that were crystallizing into horrible certainty. "You're William Harrison's daughter." It wasn't really a question because her silence provided all the answer he needed, and the security team leader's satisfied nod confirmed what Marcus had been hoping wasn't true. The man introduced himself as Reynolds and explained that Miss Harrison had been missing for over a month, that her father had mobilized substantial resources to locate her, and that there was a significant reward waiting for anyone who'd helped ensure her safe return. Marcus listened to the carefully worded explanation while studying Lily's face, searching for some sign that would help him separate truth from lies in a situation where nothing seemed to be what it had appeared. The woman he'd rescued, protected, and started to love was apparently one of the wealthiest heiresses in America, and he had no idea what that meant for any of them. "Is any of it real?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice barely controlled as Emma clung to Lily's legs and cried with the heartbroken confusion of a child watching her world collapse. "The fear, the connection between us, the way you fit into our lives. Was any of it genuine? Or am I just the fool who fell for the rich girl playing at being normal?" Lily's tears looked real enough as they streamed down her face, her obvious anguish seeming to confirm that at least some of her emotions had been authentic. But Marcus had learned that wealthy people were often skilled at emotional manipulation, that they could afford to be convincing when circumstances required deception, and he no longer trusted his ability to distinguish between genuine feeling and expertly crafted performance. The woman he'd thought he was rescuing might have been playing a role the entire time, and the possibility made him feel sick with betrayal and his own stupidity. Reynolds and his team were professional but implacable in their determination to complete their mission. They would wait while Miss Harrison gathered her belongings, they explained with courteous firmness, but she would be leaving with them within the hour, regardless of any personal preferences or emotional attachments she might have developed. Marcus watched helplessly as Lily moved through his house like someone in a trance, collecting the few items she'd accumulated during her stay with mechanical precision that suggested she'd done this before. When she emerged from the guest room carrying a small suitcase, she also held the completed music box in her hands, like someone carrying a sacred relic or a funeral urn. The sight of Sarah's final gift in the hands of a woman who might have been lying to him about everything felt like a violation of something precious, and Marcus had to fight the urge to snatch it away from her. "Keep it," Marcus said flatly, his voice thick with bitterness he couldn't quite suppress, despite Emma's obvious distress. "Consider it payment for services rendered, or a souvenir of your time among the common people." But Lily shook her head with desperate urgency, pressing the music box back into his hands with force that left no room for argument. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking on the word. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever helped create, and it's the only real thing I have left from the only real time in my life." Her words carried conviction that felt genuine, but Marcus no longer trusted his ability to read her accurately, and the pain of that uncertainty cut deeper than he'd expected. He accepted the music box because Emma was watching, and because refusing it would have required an emotional energy he didn't possess. But holding it felt like accepting evidence of his own gullibility rather than a token of shared affection. As the black sedan disappeared down the country road carrying Lily away from Cedar Falls and back to whatever world she'd come from, Marcus stood in his doorway feeling his life crumble for the second time in 3 years. Emma sobbed against his chest with the abandoned grief of childhood, asking questions he couldn't answer because he didn't understand anything that had happened to them. The music box felt impossibly heavy in his hands, its gentle melody mocking the happiness he'd dared to believe in again, its delicate craftsmanship now a reminder of how easily beautiful things could be built on foundations of lies. He wanted to smash it against the wall, to destroy this evidence of his own foolishness, but Emma's tear-streaked face stopped him from giving in to destructive impulses that would only create more wreckage in lives that had already endured too much loss. The days that followed passed in a haze of conflicting emotions that left Marcus feeling like he was drowning in plain sight. Emma withdrew into herself with the self-protective instincts children develop when adults fail them repeatedly, barely eating and crying herself to sleep every night while asking questions about Lily that Marcus couldn't answer honestly without destroying what remained of his daughter's faith in people. Marcus threw himself into his work with desperate intensity, but every piece of wood he touched reminded him of Lily's gentle guidance. Every tool he picked up carried memories of her hands showing him better techniques. Every project he completed felt incomplete without her quiet encouragement and skilled assistance. The music box sat on his dresser like an accusation, its melody silenced because he couldn't bear to hear the tune that had once represented hope for their shared future. Research became an obsession that consumed his sleepless nights and distracted his working days. Marcus scoured newspaper archives and internet articles, piecing together the public story of Lily Harrison's life from society page photographs and business journal profiles. She was 33 years old, the only child of industrial magnate William Harrison, heir to a fortune worth billions, and board member of charitable foundations that donated more money annually than most people would see in multiple lifetimes. The pictures showed her at galas and fundraising events, always perfectly dressed and composed, smiling the kind of practiced smile that revealed nothing about the person behind it. But the more Marcus read, the more questions multiplied rather than finding answers, because none of the official narrative explained why she'd been running for her life through his small town at 3 a.m, or why she'd seemed genuinely terrified of people who were supposedly there to help her. The phone call that changed everything came exactly 1 month after Lily's departure, jarring Marcus awake at 3 a.m. with timing that felt deliberately symbolic. The voice belonged to a woman who introduced herself as Patricia Wells, an attorney representing Lily Harrison in what she carefully described as a complex family situation requiring delicate handling. Miss Harrison was currently a patient at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital in Columbus, having been admitted following what her family was publicly calling an emotional breakdown brought on by the trauma of her recent disappearance. "She's been asking for you and your daughter specifically, Mr. Thompson," Patricia Wells explained with professional caution, "and frankly, she's not responding to treatment. The doctors believe that seeing you might help her recovery, but I must warn you that her father is strongly opposed to any contact between you. If you choose to visit her, there could be legal complications that might affect your custody of your daughter." Marcus didn't need time to consider his options, because the decision had been made the moment he'd answered the phone. He arranged emergency childcare for Emma through neighbors who asked no questions, loaded his truck with gas and determination, and made the 4-hour drive to Columbus through pre-dawn darkness that felt like racing toward either salvation or disaster. What he found at Riverside Hospital shattered whatever remained of his anger and replaced it with protective fury that burned hotter than anything he'd felt since Sarah's diagnosis. Lily sat by a window in the psychiatric ward, staring out at gardens she couldn't access, looking fragile and hollow in ways that had nothing to do with physical health and everything to do with systematic destruction of someone's spirit. When she saw him approaching, her face transformed with joy so pure and desperate it took his breath away completely. "You came," she whispered, reaching for him with hands that shook from medication rather than fear. "I wasn't sure you would." Marcus gathered her into his arms, feeling how thin she'd become, how brittle she felt against his chest like something precious that had been deliberately broken by people who should have protected it. "Tell me what really happened," he said simply, settling beside her on the institutional furniture that couldn't disguise the fact that this was still a prison, regardless of its medical pretensions. "Tell me the truth this time. All of it, and I'll decide what to do with the information." Lily's smile was watery, but genuine as she began speaking. And Marcus realized that whatever she told him next would determine the course of the rest of their lives. The truth, when it finally emerged in its complete and horrifying form, was worse than anything Marcus had imagined during his darkest moments of suspicion and betrayal. The kidnapping had been absolutely real, but the kidnappers had been hired by William Harrison himself as what he'd called a necessary lesson about the consequences of defying parental authority and family obligations. Lily had been trying to escape an arranged marriage to Richard Blackstone, heir to another industrial fortune, a union designed to merge two business empires regardless of what the bride wanted for her own life. When she'd refused to cooperate with plans made without her input or consent, her loving father had arranged for her to experience exactly what could happen to unprotected women in a dangerous world. The kidnapping was supposed to last just long enough to terrify her into gratitude for Richard's protection, followed by a dramatic rescue that would make her feel safe only with the man her father had chosen for her future. "I was never supposed to actually escape," Lily explained, her voice hollow with betrayal that had obviously consumed months of her life. "They had orders to keep me just scared enough to be compliant, then Dad and Richard were going to find me and save the day. I'd be so grateful and traumatized that I'd never question their protection again. But I got away before the rescue could happen, and I found you. And for 3 weeks I remembered what it felt like to be treated like a human being instead of a business asset with opinions that didn't matter." Marcus felt murderous rage building in his chest as he processed the calculated cruelty of using someone's love and concern as weapons against them. The idea that a father could orchestrate his own daughter's terrorization as a form of discipline was so far beyond his understanding that it took several minutes for the full implications to sink in completely. "When I tried to tell people what really happened after they brought me back," Lily continued, "everyone said I was having delusions caused by trauma, that my ordeal had made me paranoid and unable to distinguish reality from fantasy. Dad had me committed for my own safety, and Richard visits every day to reassure the staff that he's committed to helping me recover from my unfortunate mental health crisis. The clinical precision with which her own agency had been systematically dismantled was breathtaking in its efficiency and cruelty. Marcus understood that he was looking at someone who'd been gaslit by professionals, whose every attempt to assert reality had been reframed as evidence of instability requiring medical intervention. The psychiatric hospital wasn't treating Lily's trauma. It was completing the work her kidnappers had started, breaking down her sense of reality until she accepted the version of events that served her father's purposes. "But I don't want their world anymore," Lily said with sudden fierceness that reminded Marcus of the woman who'd helped him complete Sarah's music box, who'd braided Emma's hair and tended their garden with such patient care. "I want Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime stories and the sound of you working in your shop late at night. I want to help Emma with her homework and learn to can vegetables from your neighbor's garden and wake up every morning knowing the people around me love me for who I am rather than what I can provide for them." Her words carried the conviction of someone who'd discovered what happiness actually felt like and refused to settle for anything less authentic. Marcus felt his heart breaking and rebuilding itself simultaneously as he realized that the woman he'd fallen in love with was exactly who she'd appeared to be. The circumstances surrounding her had been manufactured, but her feelings and her character had been completely genuine throughout their time together. "Then come home with me," Marcus said simply, the decision crystallizing with clarity that surprised him. "We'll figure out the legal complications and the financial pressure and whatever other obstacles they put in our way, but you don't have to face any of it alone anymore." Lily's smile was like sunrise after the longest night in recorded history, and Marcus knew that whatever came next would test them in ways they couldn't anticipate, but they'd face it as a family rather than as isolated individuals trying to survive systems designed to break them. The lawyers would be expensive, the media attention brutal, and the social pressure potentially devastating, but some battles were worth fighting regardless of cost, and the woman in his arms was definitely worth whatever sacrifices lay ahead of them. The legal war that followed was every bit as vicious and expensive as Marcus had anticipated, but Patricia Wells and her associates proved themselves worth every dollar of their substantial fees. William Harrison's first strategy was having Lily declared mentally incompetent to handle her own affairs, but the independent psychiatric evaluation ordered by the court found her completely sane, articulate, and capable of making her own decisions despite the obvious trauma she'd endured. His second approach involved cutting off her access to trust funds and family resources, but Lily had been secretly transferring money to accounts beyond his control for months before her disappearance, preparing for exactly this kind of financial warfare. The discovery that his daughter had been planning her escape for so long clearly enraged Harrison beyond his ability to maintain his public persona of concerned father dealing with a troubled child. The media circus was everything Marcus had feared, and worse than he'd imagined possible. Society reporters painted Lily alternately as a spoiled heiress rebelling against reasonable parental guidance, or as a brave woman escaping systematic abuse, depending on which narrative served their circulation numbers better that particular week. Marcus found photographers lurking around Emma's school trying to get pictures of the billionaire's stepdaughter, forcing him to hire private security he couldn't afford to protect his child from adults who saw her as content rather than as a vulnerable 8-year-old caught in circumstances beyond her understanding. The invasion of their privacy was relentless and often cruel, but it also revealed the lengths to which Harrison was willing to go to maintain control over his daughter's life and public image. Through all the legal maneuvering and media attention, Lily proved herself stronger and more resilient than anyone had given her credit for, including herself. She testified in depositions with quiet dignity about the kidnapping, the arranged marriage, and the systematic ways her father had controlled every aspect of her existence since childhood. She faced hostile attorneys with steel resolve, confronted invasive reporters with grace under pressure, and endured her father's disappointed fury with the calm strength of someone who'd finally found something worth defending at any cost. Watching her navigate systems designed to intimidate and silence her, Marcus realized that the woman he'd rescued had been far more capable of saving herself than either of them had understood at the time. The turning point came when Emma, now 8 years old and fierce with protective love for her chosen family, asked the family court judge if she could make a statement about the custody and competency proceedings that would determine Lily's future. In a voice that carried clearly through the courtroom, packed with lawyers, reporters, and Harrison Industries executives, she told the assembled adults that Lily had taught her how to braid friendship bracelets, how to make pancakes shaped like hearts for special occasions, and how to remember her Mama Sarah with joy instead of just sadness. "Lily makes my daddy smile the way he used to before Mama got sick," Emma said with the devastating honesty only children could deliver, "and she makes me feel like I have a mama who's still here to help me grow up." The impact of her words on everyone present was immediate and unmistakable, because even the most cynical observers couldn't dismiss the genuine love and stability radiating from this small family unit. 6 months after the legal battles began in earnest, William Harrison quietly dropped his lawsuits and agreed to a settlement that granted Lily complete financial independence while legally severing his parental control over her personal and business decisions. The arranged marriage to Richard Blackstone was formally dissolved, the engagement ring returned with appropriate ceremony, and the society pages moved on to other scandals involving people who generated better headlines. Marcus and Lily were married in a simple ceremony beside Miller Creek, where they'd first found each other, with Emma serving as maid of honor and half the population of Cedar Falls in attendance to celebrate love's victory over money and manipulation. The local newspaper covered the wedding with affectionate detail, describing it as proof that fairy tales sometimes did come true for people brave enough to fight for them. The music box sat in a place of honor on their mantelpiece now, its delicate melody playing softly every evening as they gathered for dinner in the home they'd built together from determination, love, and shared commitment to creating something better than either had known before. The wooden roses Marcus had carved during those dark months after Sarah's death reminded him daily that beautiful things could bloom even after devastating storms, and that sometimes the most precious treasures arrived disguised as disasters that turned out to be blessings in elaborate disguise. Emma had started calling Lily Mama Lily to distinguish her from Mama Sarah in heaven, and the easy way she'd accepted their expanded family filled Marcus with gratitude he struggled to express adequately. Lily established a foundation dedicated to helping women escape abusive relationships and arranged marriages, funding safe houses, legal aid, and counseling services with the efficient compassion of someone who understood exactly what such resources meant to the women who needed them, desperately. Marcus expanded his woodworking operation into a small business that employed several local craftsmen, and their custom furniture developed a reputation for quality and artistry that brought orders from across the Midwest. Together, they'd created lives that honored their past losses while embracing possibilities neither had dared imagine during their darkest moments of isolation and despair. On quiet Sunday mornings, when Emma played in the garden that now blended Sarah's original plantings with Lily's additions and improvements, Marcus would watch his wife work among the flowers and marvel at the unexpected directions life could take when people were brave enough to help each other through impossible circumstances. The woman who'd stumbled out of darkness in a torn dress and blood on her wrists had become the foundation upon which their family stood, living proof that the most important rescues were always mutual efforts between people willing to risk everything for love that transcended social boundaries and economic differences. The music box played its gentle melody as another sunset painted the sky over Cedar Falls in shades of gold and rose, its notes carrying on the evening breeze like promises that real love would always find ways to survive even the darkest nights and most impossible odds. Emma's laughter drifted from the garden where she was teaching neighborhood children how to plant seeds and tend growing things, while Lily hummed along with the familiar tune as she prepared dinner for their chosen family of friends, guests, neighbors, and fellow survivors who'd learned that home was something you built with people who loved you exactly as you were. Marcus closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of his life: laughter, music, conversation, and the whisper of wind through leaves in a garden where old flowers bloomed alongside new ones, creating beauty that honored the past while embracing an unknown but hopeful future filled with infinite possibilities for joy.